My name is Dan Dorval, and I'm President and CEO of Dorval and Cherney Financial Advisors. I am an independent certified financial planner and author of my book, Financial Success for the Rest of Us, Reality Based Financial Planning for Mainstream America.
Hi, my name is Leah Woodley. I'm an associate financial advisor with Dorval and Cherney Financial Advisors. Our conversations discuss what it means to do quality of life planning in all areas of your life.
Dan, in the second chapter of your book, Financial Success for the Rest of Us, you talk about defining what's most important to you. You often say that a financial plan without values isn't really a plan at all. Can you unpack what you mean by that?
Well, when we focus on quality of life all the time, people relentlessly hear that term. That is your values and priorities and motivations. And if you do not have any meaning or purpose associated with any of the money that you have or your financial decision making, it becomes a series of random decisions. You start to focus on maybe dollar amounts or you focus on transactions, but you're not really thinking about what am I trying to accomplish. So a lot of times people come in and they'll say something like, I'll retire when I get to X number of dollars, $2 million, $3 million, $4 million, or whatever that number is for them. And when I reach that point, then I'll retire. And I'm like, well, then if the market went down, you won't have that much money anymore. Does that mean you're going to go back to work? And they go, well,
Hmm.
no, no. And I'm like, well, but you're just talking about a number. That number is so arbitrary in the whole scheme of things. So then we try to bring them back from those numbers, which, of course, there's marketing that's associated just strictly on numbers. Like you
Hmm.
need to have this much money in order to be able to retire. They get caught up in that noise. So when we start to talk about these values and priorities, it all comes back to what is this money for? What can it do for you? And if you're focused on a number, you become highly resistant to spending, for example. If I want to buy a house and all of a sudden I'm going to use some of these resources that I've saved and accumulated, okay, that house is quality of life. And yet at the same time, people don't want to see their investments or their savings go down. And so they'll become resistant to using it to actually enhance quality of life. So, from a financial planning perspective, if we can get them to talk about their values and priorities and what's important to them, we can start to get to that point of what is this money for? And now we
Yeah.
can give meaningful advice and planning about those resources in a way that moves them in a positive direction.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really surprising to see how often people struggle to even get to that point to being able to articulate what their values are and what their priorities are because like you said everyone is just so focused on the numbers. So you recommend setting aside a couple of hours with your spouse, no distractions, to just talk through values. Why is that step so critical?
A lot of people never talk about money. They
Mm.
talk about all sorts of other things, religion, politics, sex. They talk about all these different things. But in many cases, they don't really want to talk about money because it's uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And in some cases, you might have spouses that share very similar values. And in other cases, you might be completely different. And it's important to understand that in a way that you can look at and go, okay, maybe one person is a saver, one person's inherently a spender. They don't necessarily understand the other person, and that
Mm.
there could be any number of reasons for that. And if they can sit down and talk through why do I feel the way that I feel and start to maybe get some understanding rather than judgment, you can think about, okay, how do we proceed forward so that this works for both of us?
Mhm.
And if there are distractions, it's just very easy in today's world to be distracted. And now you don't take that process seriously because it's uncomfortable. And then you go through life and days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, months turn into years. And pretty soon you find yourself in a situation where maybe you resent each other
Mm-hmm.
because you haven't saved enough, or maybe you've not taken those trips because you're saving too much. And it without that discussion or some sort of honest interaction about it, it can really break down a relationship.
Yeah, we see that sometimes. So once these values are defined and everyone's on the same page and clear, how do you translate something like the value of family or faith into real financial decisions?
That's a little bit harder, and it's obviously more personal. If somebody,
Hmm.
for example, with faith, if they say, we're going to tithe,
Hmm.
and maybe somebody else, their lifestyle has just never been that way. They just don't feel
Hmm.
that way. You can see the conflict point there where one person's committing a sizable amount of resources to something that the other person doesn't necessarily value. And a lot of times the key here is to compromise.
Hmm.
And without a discussion, without an understanding of the other person, how do you compromise? You're going to just stick to, I think we should do this. The other person says, I think we should do this. And you're going to argue about it, and it might turn into more friction than it really has to be. Now, a lot of times, the key here is once you agree to something, if you can automate it, now
Hmm.
it becomes a little bit easier to do. It just becomes an accepted habit rather than something that you're going to fight about every month. So, for example, we talk a lot about, in my book, I talk about if you have a certain agreement on spending levels, for example, we might transfer that money out of a joint checking account into your own spending accounts so you can each express your own unique values and priorities as it relates to that discretionary spending. And if you make that money enough so that you don't have a scarcity mentality anymore, you can start to act from this more abundance mentality, and it might help you to spend in ways that you've considered frivolous in the past. Maybe you take a longer trip, you go to a different place, you spend more money on things that bring you quality of life. If we don't automate that process, now it's a one-time decision. Depending on the emotions involved at the time of the decision, it has the ability to escalate, turn into an argument.
Yeah, I can see how that can easily happen. Now, moving on to budgeting. You're very clear that you're not a fan of hyper detailed budgeting. Talk about that.
People can really get caught up in the details and the minutia. Yeah, with today's software programs, you can budget everything right down to the nearest dollar or penny or whatever you want to say. And you don't need to do that.
Hmm.
If you look at a budget from a real high level type of perspective, a lot of budgeting really only requires 5 or 6 items. And you look at that from a high level and say, all right, we know what our housing costs are, and we know what our transportation costs are, and we'll have, food, and then we'll have, miscellaneous. And then of course the hardest part here is this idea of discretionary.
Hmm.
And if we can work with the concept of fixing your discretionary expenditures, that is a powerful concept, because discretionary for a lot of people is what's the money left and I'm going to spend it. So if
Hmm.
they get a raise, they get a bonus, something has happened to improve their financial situation, their discretionary just immediately fills that up. And now
Hmm.
they're spending as much or more than what that increase was. And we'll see people at very high income levels that are accumulating credit card debt or other debts. They can afford the payments to some extent, but they're digging a hole and they're never going to get ahead. If you can talk together and say, okay, from a discretionary standpoint, here's what we're going to do for travel, entertainment, things that we value. And now you fix that number, whether it's 1,000 a month or 2,000 a month or whatever the number is. If you can agree to that and automate that process, now you don't have that creep, that lifestyle creep that we hear so much about. And yeah, there might be affordability issues in today's world. You might have to budget more for housing or transportation or things like that, but you have a better mechanism in place to be able to deal with those changes.
Yeah, automating kind of takes the ability to make poor decisions out the way. So once someone does establish their cash flow, how should people think about prioritizing things like emergency savings and retirement and education?
Well, this really gets to our hierarchy of cash flow. There are limited resources for almost everyone we help. If somebody has unlimited resources, it's easy for a financial planner. You sit down and you say, what are the things you want to do? And then you just allocate money to do it. And fine, we're in great shape and we can do everything we want to do. Most of us don't have unlimited resources. So the
Hmm.
people we're helping, they have to set priorities. So now if we look at, okay, I'm going to save for retirement, but I'm also want to fund my kids' education. And if you look at that and you go, well, I don't have enough money to do both necessarily, now you have to think in terms of how do I most efficiently and effectively use my resources to accomplish as much as I can? So I might sacrifice some of my education goals in order to save more for retirement or vice versa. Maybe for retirement, I decide I'm going to put more for education. That means I'm likely going to have to work an extra year, 2 years, 3 years in order to accomplish those goals. Financial planning gives you the ability to make an informed decision. You're not randomly making decisions. You're saying, I'm going to commit this resource over here, understanding that I may have a sacrifice to make over here. And I
Hmm.
am willing to do that. And another person might say, I'm not willing to do that. So I'm going to sacrifice some of this goal over here in exchange for accelerating this one.
Thank you for clarifying that for us. Now, if someone's watching this video and only takes one idea away about financial planning, what do you hope it is?
That's a harder question, but really, this relentless focus on quality of life clarifies so much of our world.
Yeah.
We can get so bogged down in the minutia. And if we kind of step back from that, all of those decisions we make every day, countless decisions, dozens and dozens of spending decisions, small, big ones, all of those things. If we can step back from that, look at the big picture of what we're trying to accomplish, and now we don't have to sit and argue because something we bought cost an extra $100, and now what are we going to do? If you're thinking in terms of what your real values and priorities are, that quality of life decision making often takes this blurry concept and now clarifies it, so we feel like we're making good decisions pretty consistently as a habit.
Yes. Well, thank you for all that you shared. I would encourage anyone, if you haven't gotten your copy of Financial Success for the Rest of Us, it is available on Amazon, and I'll put the link in the description box below. And until next time, have a great one.
Thanks, Leah.
Thank you.